Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 37th episode of Retuning Your Firm. And it's a beautiful sunny day here in Hertfordshire. And I think I was hearing from one of our panelists in Harrogate as well. So hopefully everybody has a bit of sunshine today, and we'll try and bring some more into your life today. So what are we going to talk about today? There are three key themes that we're focusing on today. The first one is red teams. And Marcus and I can have a conversation about the icon. I think it's quite an interesting one. I call it challenge. A sleep manifesto. Don't think that image needs any introduction at all, but delighted that Sarah's come to talk to us about that. And we're going to do a poll on engagement and recruitment, because actually the two work very, very closely together. So those are the three areas we're focusing on today. Who's on the panel today? Firstly, as I mentioned, Marcus Dimbleby, who is a partner in an organization called Red Team Thinking. Lots of people have had red teams. Red Team Thinking is the philosophy behind red teams. Amazing book written by Bryce, who is Marcus's partner. And we're hearing a bit more about him, about how can you become more proficient in your red team thinking within your organization. Because if you don't have a contrarian in a decision-making body, you end up, if you're not too careful, with a lot of groupthink. Dr. Sarah Hattam, a GP and founder of Concilio Health, does some amazing things, obviously, in her day job, given what's going on with COVID. So I'm really, really delighted that you found some time to join us and talk a little bit about health, and in particular, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, sleep manifesto. What does that actually mean? What can we all do for ourselves? Jeremy would probably need no introduction from anybody on the call. He's been with us on a number of them. Managing partner of Hayes McIntyre. What I really like about Jeremy is that he's very happy to listen and then say, oh, I haven't tried that, I'll give it a go. So we're looking forward to hearing how some of those ideas we've been sharing on the show have worked in his firm, which is about 250 strong London-based organization, as most of you will be aware. And then we have Francesca, who has been with me. We were trying to work out, she's saying, well, I've been on 36. And I said, well, I'm the only person who can beat you on 37. But she has been an amazing contributor. And we were chatting a minute ago. She said, well, 9 months ago, I suddenly stayed in Caterham and I haven't left since. Whereas previously I was on a plane every other day. And guess what? I quite like sleeping in my own bed. So back to sleep again. So finally, me, founder and chief exec of the Managing Partners Forum, happy to host and spend today with you for between now and 10 o'clock. So what are we going to talk about? Let's just put the thing in context. Let's just think through what are the 7 strategies that we have found really helpful when retuning your firm, or indeed possibly your life. And Sarah may have views on that. So think big, believe 6 impossible things before breakfast is what Lewis Carroll says. Are you really thinking about what's possible? But also think small. You've got to think on the angles that resonate with your key audiences, and you kind of yin and yang between the two of them is my view. Remember that you are actually the power of your relationships, and having an address book is great, but actually reciprocity and favors is what builds relationships. So bear that in mind. Think about campaigns. Think about how you're going to actually turn your audiences into a community. Lots of one-offs are fine. The professional firms have actually been very effective, I think, at retaining their revenues through the pandemic. And the primary reason is because they've actually been able to link into clients. They had existing relationships, and it's those powers and those relationships and the focus on them as a group, which has really helped firms. You've got to go for new ideas and services. I don't think this particular session would have worked a year ago. People would have said, oh, I'm far too busy, etc. But actually, no, this has been quite helpful for people. We find hugely loyal following, I think, to be perfectly honest. I mean, 37 episodes I wasn't expecting to do, believe me. But so you've got to drop convention and go for some new things, but also be quick about it. But when you're being quick, you've got to do it in a structured way. And what I always say is, as an accountant, I am one, change your accounting policies, and you can change the profits. That's easy. Now, accounting policies and assumptions is fundamentally the same thing. So what you need to do, whatever you're doing, is articulate, spell it out, what you're trying to achieve, and what are the assumptions underlying that objective, and then market test your assumptions. And if they prove invalid, and use the word experiment because it's best, when they prove invalid, because the idea for a scientist that all their experiments will succeed would be no chance. It took 10 years, I think, for Einstein to come up with his theory of relativity. So then when they prove invalid, amend them. And the point about the validity is it depersonalizes it. And that's really, really important. And then you can pivot in a new direction. And that is lean start, is the term that's often used for that. Be entrepreneurial. And that means keep listening and innovating. And the most important word in that sentence is listening. If you're not listening to your clients, you won't be delivering the right services. If you're not listening to your people, they may want to go somewhere else, which does. So just remember those. And thanks again to Alina Kudsko. Goes back to April, those points, slightly adapted, but I just find them really, really helpful. So what's going on in the forum? A couple of things here. We've got a session next Tuesday for the firm-wide leaders with Julia Hayho and Kate Lai, and that's looking at what's actually happening, reflections on the strategic and leadership pathway through the pandemic. Really, really interesting stuff, really great research that has been done, particularly of law firm leaders and general counsel, but it's much wider than lawyers alone. And then, as you may have seen, big event in March, big summit, if you like, Fast Track Innovation, and where we've spent about 2 years looking at how you can design a design sprint journey that really works for pretty much any challenge. And we're going to be showing you with all the profs and some examples. So a couple of really interesting things coming up as well as the others. Awards, again, I'll say this every week, I think, until 26th of February. But just do bear in mind that these are, we think, some of the most important awards, certainly 19th year in, but we actually think that the contribution of management to the firm in the pandemic has in many cases been existential. If your firm was badly managed, you are struggling, honestly. And that possibly hasn't been the case in the past. So this is really, these are the ones where your management has a chance to show, well, we're making a contribution. But amusingly, we're not using the word celebrate anywhere. We're recognizing the leadership, because we're not out of it yet. But absolutely, I always say BC should be stand for before COVID rather than the other version, but that's probably blasphemy. So let's move on. What else? Well, last week, you remember, Sue Vinicum talked very eloquently about the importance of targets and how they had helped her drive a program which had been hugely effective in increasing women in leadership roles. Obviously, a lot of work still to be done, but amazing lady, and you don't get the CBE for nothing. And then Pete was talking about biometric intelligence, which again, sort of, I guess it's more of a scientific piece, but actually, how can you get people back to work safely and responsibly through bringing some biometric intelligence into your operations? So again, today's wonderful sessions speakers, they will be up on the website early next week, so do catch up. And just mentioning it, there's one there which is a bit poignant for me, because it was a guy, Professor Gareth Jones, who really sadly, as you may have read, died, followed his dog into the sea near Brighton and died at the weekend, which was, as I knew him really well, a bit scary. The 5-minute session which he included in this group has been used by IE Business School as their sort of epitaph, if you like, and hundreds and hundreds of people have watched that 5 minutes. So we don't even know where this show goes, but that's not a particularly exciting part, to be honest. But anyway, do watch it. It's a really interesting one. It's called what is it? Leadership in the New Normal. Really interesting. Great ideas. Very meaningful. So polls, let's move on. What have we got to say about polls? Well, only that government really finds our polls useful. The quote stands up for itself. And also the House of Lords, they used one of our polls, and I think it was the only poll that was used in that report on future UK-EU relationship. I don't think the report, sadly, was noticed much by the government, but that's another story. But at least that was in there. So, we do make our polls carry. Government certainly misses them, I know, if we don't get them to them on time. So what happened last week? Let's just go through that. We did one on new technologies, and this is quite interesting. It was a bit hard to present last week because I kind of brought two of the questions together now, the reds and the blues. But if we're going back, this is people in the red is thinking back and the blue is thinking forward. So theoretically, it's a 6-year period we're covering. So what were the things, three things with the most expensive changes? And both of the top two have got the word deliver in. The technologies we use to deliver services, how you deliver your services to customers and clients. And interestingly, not only are they the top two for the past 3 years, but they're also perceived to be the top three for the next 3 years. Now, is there a myopia there? Are we in the danger of thinking, well, because that's what happened in the past, therefore that's what's going to happen in the future? And I know that in management, there's always a concern that let's project the budget forward by adding a few percent here or a few percent there, rather than actually doing sort of zero base. So I don't know. All I will say is that, and again, many of you will have completed it last week, those are the two that you think are the most important. How you select your leaders, how you develop your strategies, who your clients are, the sort of people you use to provide services, and how you charge for services, and how you train people. They're in there, but they're nothing like as important as those two. So that's the first sort of bit of feedback. If we then drill down into tech a little bit more, what's the tech being used for? There's a little bit more of a change here. So if we pick up the red again, which is for the past 3 years, the one that has been most used for is speeding up tasks. That's where the tech's mainly been used for. But looking into the blue, the one that people are seeing coming through the highest or the top is substitution, and then subsequently reducing cost. There isn't very much about new tasks, very little looking backwards, a bit more going forwards. And when it comes to infrequent tasks, hardly at all. So again, the message here is that it's about what's sometimes called machine learning. In other words, let's be more efficient, let's be substitute for people where we can, let's keep the cost, let's speed things up. But we're not looking here at an AI nirvana, I suspect, is the message to that. What's driving it? Well, interesting. We asked a couple of questions here. We asked what the drive is in terms of investment in new technologies and what are the drives in terms of change in general. And actually, to be honest, the reds and blues pretty much marry. Okay, there's some disconnects around keeping up with competitors maybe, which is less of a tech-driven thing. But generally, the efficiency comes through very, very strongly when it comes to technology. So as I said, I mentioned efficiency game, but when it comes to demands of clients and customers, and I guess in a sense, they're the only place you make money. So there's some logic in that. So those are the drivers. What's getting in the way? Again, just looking really at the tech here, lack of time. Not much doubt about that, and lack of expertise and not really sure what to do, and too many options, and also we don't have necessarily the finances. It's not an external source, external money. No one's really going out and getting venture capital in. That's 3%. So there's some barriers there. So let's try and wrap that whole thing up. What is that actually telling us? This is quite interesting. It's kind of saying, if you look at it, we had a sort of spectrum, and at one level it was our model depends primarily on the knowledge and abilities of our human experts, and that was now about 20%, they reckoned, and then going down to number one, which got 0 points, by the way, nul point. Our business model depends primarily on delivering content through proprietary online systems. And what I guess I'm seeing here is everybody thinks over the next 3 years they're going to make one step closer to one, or one step further away from five. So it's an evolutionary process, gradual. That's what people think. Now, will the reality work out? Who knows? Anyway, that's a quick run through the poll from last week, and thank you all for completing it. So what I want you to do today, we want to do on an employee engagement and recruitment. Now that's a very big area, I appreciate. So I've really tried to focus on almost from the employer perspective rather than the employee, because I think that's in a way also not given enough focus. So what do you perceive as an employer to be the key elements in your employee experience? What metrics are you using to assess your performance? How do you find out what people actually feel about the firm? Are people issues getting the right attention and priority? Are your recruitment messages distinctive and compelling? Where are the sources of salary pressure looking into the next year? Where is the headcount likely to expand? If people are leaving, why? And how are you going about finding new people? And the reason I call it recruitment is because actually from the recruiter's perspective, those are the questions that most candidates will try and ask them, because those are things that matter. Because you don't join a firm for day one, you join a firm for a number of years, and therefore these are the things that really will matter to you if you are in any organization. Okay, so going back to the first question, what are the most important elements in the employment experience? Fairly clear winner there, colleagues and the culture, followed by the client base and the technical quality of the work, and career advancement. Those are kind of the three, which are probably the top three working on that question. Metrics, most of you have sickness and absent measures, clearly. 20%, none of those measures apply, which is actually quite a lot. So I do think formal metrics are actually quite important to assess your performance as an employer. So we'll come to that one, hopefully. Moving on to the next one. How do people find out? Exit interviews, is most everybody uses those, 92%. Feedback from performance. But there's quite a few other tracks which aren't getting that many high percentages, whether it's the anonymous feedback, whether it's the training sessions, or indeed just sort of unidentified comments from a trusted intermediary. But everybody's tracking something. I suppose that's something on that one. How satisfied are you that people? Well, no one has a problem. That's good. Very satisfied, 28%, 56%, quite satisfied. So kind of in the middle there. In terms of the most important recruitment messages currently being used, again, pretty much it reflects the one that we saw before. In other words, the colleagues and culture is the thing that really is being pushed very hard. Other ones, again, you'll see them all. They're in the sort of working arrangements, develop training and development, client base. They're all kind of secondary. So very much around this is the firm, who we are, the people, the culture. That's the key message in terms of recruitment. And it's mostly clear, crystal clear, only 12%. I think that's being honest. And I think, thank you, these are anonymous polls, by the way, so that probably helps. But most people I talk to aren't willing to say that only 12% of their messages are crystal clear. So work to be done there, I think. In terms of where's the pressure coming from, it's very much in the senior, what I call the senior frontline advisors, the associates, the people just below partner level. That's where the real pressure is. In terms of the headcount, it's the next level down. It's the junior ones, which is where most of the growth of headcount is coming through. In terms of why are people leaving, mainly the big one there, I think, is money. Now, is that true? I've always heard that money is an excuse rather than the reason, but hey, we can have a conversation around that. Career advancement, again, holding people back. Those are kind of the two that jump out from looking at that one. And in terms of when you're actually recruiting people, what routes are you using? And it's kind of a bit of a mix, to be perfectly honest. There's no clear, there's a combination of agents and to both either retained or exclusive, or contingent. Some people have internal recruiting teams, and some people reach out to their networks. So that's the feedback which will be shared, and thank you very much for completing that. And I think it's now time to move on to the first of our guests. So I'd like to invite Marcus to come and talk a bit about red teams. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me along today. Really interesting to see some of those polls and the responses, which I'll discuss shortly. And as Richard said at the beginning, the icons that came up, he said he thought reflected challenge, and it certainly does. So I'd like to start off with a quote which talks about the scale of the challenge that we're now facing today. And the quote goes like this: "It's moving too fast. It's revolution, not evolution. Now, there are many accelerations at once, and one of the biggest problems is the difficulty of mankind to cope with it. I don't know whether political leaders or business leaders can easily handle it." Now, that was a quote by Ian Conn, who was the then CEO of Centrica, a part of the British gas utilities world. And that wasn't in the last year. That was quoted in March 2018. So a lot of these accelerations were happening before COVID even became a thing. Now, the last decade of digital acceleration has been, you might say, rapid. We've seen nothing like it in the last 12 months. And the VUCA world, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, is now our default operating environment. So what Con was saying was this: the pace of change and the scale of the challenge we're now facing has become too big for all of us. We can't cope with it individually. And his prediction came true. In the following 12 months, Centrica's profits dropped by almost 1 billion. Huge loss for British Gas, and funny old thing, Con's no longer the CEO. And all this was before COVID was even a thing. Now, the reason this has become a problem is that the strategy, we think, and the decision-making tools that we've learned in business schools over the last 10, 20 plus years, they're ill suited for the world we're now facing into. And if we didn't think it was a VUCA world then it certainly is now. And the last 12 months have proven that. And we've seen an acceleration within 6 months, what we'd normally expect within 6 years. So these previous techniques are no longer fit for purpose. They were created in a different world where life was predictable, pace of change was manageable, we knew what was coming, and we could have long-term plans and apply a waterfall mentality to the projects and programs that we worked for. But then we moved into the digital world, and that mentality just didn't work anymore. So we saw new ways of working evolve, experimentation, test and learn, let's become agile, but that's not working out too well either. Digital transformations have become the new big thing to do, and in the last 5 years, numerous reports are showing that over 80% of these have failed. Now, one might say that these new ways of working aren't working. And if we recall the results from the last week's poll that Richard showed earlier, there's a focus on technology and process. And this is probably one of the underlying reasons why these things are failing. And as I said, this has been accelerated. And while these technologies and new ways of working might seem to have accelerated over the last few years, what hasn't changed are our ways of thinking. It seems that we're still stuck in a mindset where we're mentally not keeping up with the pace of change in technology and also the ways of working that we've adopted. So why is that? Well, we kind of think the solution's technology. We think it's process, but the solution isn't a tool or a checkbox. It's the way we think. Now, we're all faced with biases. We're human. It's only natural. But these cognitive biases that we have affect the way we think. They affect the way we work, the way we plan, and the way we execute on a day-to-day basis. So while we may think technology and process are the answer for a digital world, if you look at business agility, and the Business Agility Institute report for the last 3 years has said that the biggest, most prolific challenge to digital transformations and these new ways of working is leadership. It's not technology, it's not processes, it's leadership. And this is a people problem we're facing now. What we've also seen today in that second poll is that people want culture. People want internal behaviors that they can feel part of. That's the number one thing in organizations they want. And this is counter to this desire for technology and processes that we've seen so far. So looking at previous ways of working and project management, we talked about people, process, technology in that order. But I sense that what we've seen in the last decade is that we flip that to technology first, focusing on the shiny things we want to build or adopt. What's the latest thing we've read about? Then we focus on new processes, implementing these change processes, which unfortunately just become a checkbox exercise. So what you end up doing is ticking a box rather than doing the thing that brings the value you're trying to achieve. And then the third thing of people, well, that's kind of falling off the edge. It's just an assumed thing that happens, but it clearly hasn't been for some time now. So I think what we need to do is arm our leaders with better tools and techniques to allow them to think differently. And not only just for them to think differently, as Ian Conn said, you can't do this on your own anymore. This is something that you have to enable the masses with and to source the wisdom of the crowd. What we need to do is enable our people. And Richard mentioned at the beginning that one of the most toxic things in any organization is groupthink. What red team thinking, the evolution of red teaming over the years has become, is a set of tools and techniques that enable a contrarian viewpoint in an organization to allow your plans and thinking to be challenged accordingly and to ensure the best ideas win. So how do we challenge our own thoughts? Now, Dr. Daniel Kahneman said in a recent podcast, a great quote. He said that to do that, you have to protect your dissenters in your organization. And you do that by having a red team thinking capability. Because if everybody has a critical thinking mindset, then this allows you to be able to challenge internally in a professional, collegiate manner, which is what we need. Now, the red teaming tools and techniques also allow you to do this anonymously if you have to, because, funny old thing, in many organizations, there isn't the psychological safety that people have to feel safe to have a viewpoint. They don't feel comfortable speaking up and certainly not to challenge the ideas from above. But by having such a capability within your organization, we found that red team thinking allows you to surface those ugly truths that we don't like to face while we hide behind those comforting lies. And by doing that, and by not outsourcing your thinking to a large consultancy or someone else, you can create this internal capability where everybody internally is thinking differently, but aligned across the organization. And they're focused on the right outcomes that need to be achieved. Identifying those threats early and also supporting the opportunities that exist, but just haven't surfaced yet. And in doing this, the leadership within are then able to make those better decisions faster. And you have a culture that's created that provides all the people and those leaders with the right amount of challenge to ensure they have the best information and a workforce that feels included and engaged. Now, the answers that any organization need lie within. You just have to surface those answers. And how do you do that? And that starts with your people. Get them to think differently, get that right, and the technologies and the processes will follow. And that's the power, we believe, of red team thinking. That's a quick few minutes. I could go on for a while longer, but I want to keep in Richard's good books. So thank you for your time.
You're always in my good books, my friend. That's the least of your problems. But look, thank you very much for those insightful thoughts. I'd like to introduce our second guest for today, which is Sarah Hattam. Dr. Sarah Hattam's GP, as I said, mentioned, has pulled us away from her busy surgery to come and talk to us today, which is really, really thoughtful and helpful for her. And she's going to talk about sleep and sleep manifesto, completely different topic. So looking forward to it. Over to you, Sarah.
I am indeed. Thank you very much for inviting me on, Richard. It's lovely to be with you this morning. So I'd like to start off by asking you a very personal question. Now you're worried, right? How much sleep did you get last night? I know that Richard loves his polls. I've seen one in evidence this morning, but we at Concilio Health conducted our very own poll of frontline NHS staff back in November. And what we found was that over 2/3 of the people on that call had slept less than 6 hours the previous night. We didn't dare ask how much less. Now, allow me to ask you another question. How many people can survive on less than 6 hours sleep without showing any impairment, expressed as a percentage and rounded to a whole number? Well, unfortunately, the answer is 0. Now, I have a suspicion that there will be at least some of you on this call who are labouring under the misapprehension that you are different, that maybe you feel that you are able to behave as if you're one of this ultra rare breed of what's called genetic short sleepers. So that's a very small proportion of the population who is able to get by on less than 3 or 4 hours sleep without showing any evidence of compromise. So I'm going to burst your bubble now and tell you that the odds of that being the case are similar to the odds of you being struck by lightning. So why all the fuss about sleep? Why am I here to focus on sleep this morning? Well, our greatest asset is not our money or our time, it's our health, particularly the health of our brain. And what do you think has the biggest impact on your executive decision making, your mental agility, your cognitive flexibility, your working memory, your emotional intelligence, your communication skills? It's sleep. A study in the peer-reviewed journal Nature a few years ago showed that when people sleep less than 5 or 6 hours a night, their cognitive performance the next day is at or around the drink driving limit. So we need to wake up. That's the brain you're bringing to work if you're not prioritizing sleep. And just suppose you're next in line for the COVID vaccine. You will mount a 2-fold higher antibody response, at least a 2-fold higher antibody response, if you're well slept the night before. But it's not just at the individual level that sleep has implications, because poor sleep has impacts across whole organisations, which we see only too clearly when we go in and run our workplace engagement and wellbeing diagnostic, which often shows that sleep is having an impact not just on the individual well-being of a person within that organisation, but also on the overall levels of dynamic engagement, how connected people feel to the role that they do in that organisation, and their emotional engagement, how connected they feel to that whole organisation, which sits really well with the results from that first question in the poll. And a paper in the Academic Journal of Management a few years ago showed that sleep-deprived people leaders, managers in organisations, have teams that are more stressed because underslept bosses cast shadows on their teams. And unfortunately, tired human brains make mistakes. So history is littered with human tragedy after human tragedy, which has been caused in some part by fatigue. I'm thinking of Chernobyl, 5 Mile Island, the Exxon Valdez disaster, the Clapham rail crash, and the list goes on. And I've lost count of the number of corporates that we've worked with where the mental health message seems to be that it's okay not to be okay. Well, no, it's not. Not when the ways of working in that organisation effectively force people to burn the candle at both ends, where there's a culture of macho bravado around being able to get by on little sleep. We need to get away from caffeine and denial and basically wake up. And my sleep manifesto this morning, the crux of what I want to say is that we need to realize that sleep deprivation is having an impact across the UK. The economic impact of poor sleep in organizations is a little less than 2% of our GDP. And so I would suggest that what we need is to stop us sleepwalking into this physical and mental health and well-being and performance and productivity crisis. We need a sleep strategy. We need a UK sleep strategy for business, because sleep truly is the best physiological venture capital injection for you and your organization. So thank you very much.
That was wonderful. I was curious. I was kind of thinking, so we've got to wake up to a sleep strategy.
Yeah.
Anyway, Jeremy, what do you think? Let's hear your thoughts, and welcome back and Happy New Year.
Thank you, Richard. Happy New Year to everyone. If it's not too late, it feels as ever. January is a slow, long month. Certainly not helped by lockdown. But thank you very much, Sarah. That was very interesting and made me realise that of course we have been very good as an employer at promoting fresh air and promoting exercise. But I'm not sure that we have directly promoted the benefits of a good sleep pattern and plenty of it. So that's certainly something I've noted down. So thank you for that. Very, very interesting comments as well, I thought, from Marcus. Thank you. It's interesting, Marcus, you talk about groupthink. When trying to deal with 37 other partners in our practice, sometimes it's like herding cats. There doesn't seem to be an awful lot of groupthink, but I understand what you say, and certainly obtaining thoughts and wisdom from a wider group of people is something that we think about and are conscious of. And I suppose that also very, very nicely fits into conversations we've had in this group before and ongoing conversations around diversity and inclusion and just getting away from that groupthink that might exist. And I think early on, Richard, when we looked at the survey, and it was interesting where colleagues and culture scored highly, and I'd entirely agree with that, although I think that has been a real challenge since March. I think that the great benefits of work, which a lot of us see, which is the interaction with our colleagues and the culture of that work environment, has been quite a struggle over the last, what now is approaching sort of a full year, because when we're all working at home and out of touch and out of contact, as much as we try and maintain that is a real challenge. So I think that is something that as a business we're increasingly conscious of, and it is increasingly a challenge. Things that I'd noted in on those slides and on the survey that I think are particularly relevant in the current climate is recognition and reward, and I'd underline recognition more than reward. Actually, at the moment, I think people are working extremely hard, and it's really important to keep talking to them and comment on and recognise the good work they're doing and the efforts they're putting in at that time. So I'd underlined recognition, and I'd also underlined trust and respect, which I think is really important in the current environment as well. So I think those are my initial comments. Richard, I'll hand back to you.
Great, Francesca, welcome back. And what have you taken from today's really different, very different, but very inspiring presentations, I think, in many ways?
Well, wonderful as always, Richard, for pulling all that together. And I'm actually feeling a bit tired now, to be truly honest. I was actually thinking, good Lord, I thought I had a good night's sleep last night, but maybe not. I might start with the sleep piece, because I think that's just such a powerful aspect of perhaps the psyche that some of us have grown up with. Because when I was beginning work, obviously when dinosaurs ruled the earth, the idea of surviving on 4 hours sleep and a couple of cups of coffee was considered to be the thing you did. That was the adrenaline fueled lifestyle. And if you were lazing around in bed for 8 hours, the concept where you really were losing bits of the day. And I've been reading a lot recently, people are talking about how you can get better balance in your life. It seems to always involve getting up incredibly early. And I always wonder if there's something going a little bit wrong about the fact that everything that might help you give a balance actually deprives you of sleep. Because it's either get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go and exercise, or go to bed a bit later and hit the gym. Something that's really interesting about the value and the recuperative effect of sleep, and there are many people who've been struggling with different health issues over the last few months because of COVID, and that absence of sleep, it does really mess up your thinking process. So I think there's something powerful around that sleep manifesto, and winding down to give your sons a chance to get good sleep. And because I do love a gadget, as you know, Richard, we've invested in one of those little electrotherapy things. You might see it's on the BBC this week, funny enough, which again is to try and change your wave patterns a bit to help you sleep even better. Fascinating, the tech that you can bring into this piece. And I do also just want to pick on the red team thinking, which there's so many fascinating elements to that. And we were joking before the programme, you can't really cover all of that in 5 minutes, but you did a very good job, Marcus. Something fascinating there, just to pick up on that bias piece, the how easy it is to slip into just doing what you've always done. And I think it's really telling at the moment. Here we are coming out of a pandemic that's none of us have ever experienced anything quite like this. We've never seen work conditions of this nature. We've never had to pivot in the same way before. It's the perfect opportunity to really challenge your thinking, because I think the easy slide back to the old world would be the obvious thing to do, the easy thing to do. And actually there's so much that we have learned that is good from the last few months. How can we make sure we keep that and truly capture it and genuinely do things differently going forward? Because if we don't, we've missed a fantastic opportunity. So one final thing there, Richard, is the power of having the contrarian view. And the number of boards that I've sat on, even in the not-for-profit area, very often like-minded people coalesce in boards and coalesce in senior leadership teams, and they think they're being fantastically effective, but they're all incredibly like-minded. And sometimes that nuance, that extra thinking, that contrarian view is hugely valuable, even if all it does is confirm what you thought was correct. But there's something powerful about a leadership team that truly embraces the person who challenges and doesn't push it down, and really is willing to listen to it, even if they decide to carry on doing what they're doing, but to have that thoughtful, constructive challenge, hugely valuable.
Yeah, I was thinking it's almost like you want to institutionalize your mavericks. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I think it's quite easy to put the mavericks in the maverick corner and go, oh, that's Joe or Joanna. They always come up with something differently, and almost sort of push it to one side because of the fact that they are different thinkers. And there's a very powerful piece about actually sometimes it is listening to that and truly working out what is it that they're seeing that actually no one else is seeing, and can you get value from it?
Marcus, just to bring you into this one. I mean, Jeremy, when he was commenting, talked a bit about herding cats and how typically in a professional services firm, you want a broad church for people with different opinions, because that typically has been the strength of the business. Your red team thinking is a set of tools, techniques, call it what you like. And how does it work when you have a lot of what I call, let's be extreme, Monty Python's 100-yard dash contestants?
No. Absolutely, Richard. It does both ends of the spectrum. So those are all thinking alike, and in the groupthink model, it allows those different thoughts to be extrapolated and challenged. But also, as you said, when you're trying to herd the cats and you've got a myriad of different people with different ideas, the main thing is to get those ideas surfaced. It doesn't matter how many there are. With the tools and techniques that you can use, numbers aren't an object, a problem. You can have 1,000 ideas, and it's how you capture them all. And also, it's been able to surface those ideas. Some of the best ideas from those contrarian mavericks, even if they're a cat who needs to be herded, don't come out. So they're sat quietly while some of the alphas, some of the leaders, executives, the usual problems we've seen in the sort of curves within the different leadership circles, is extrapolating that information from the individual. And if you get 10, 20 different ideas, that's more powerful than having one constant idea from 20 different individuals. And the tools and techniques allow that full spectrum of analysis of them to bring them together. And then you use that group to assess all of those ideas. So again, the alpha who thinks their idea is the best and they shout the loudest, that's fine. But their idea is going to go up on a board with 20 others anonymously. So nobody knows whose ideas is which. And therefore you use the tools and techniques to vote them, to apply weighted anonymous feedback, to collectively bring out the best ideas. And that's the whole point of the red team thinking concept, is that the best ideas have to win. And when you actually assess what's gone on in history and in business, some of the worst ideas have won because of the way they've been driven through by individuals, by ego, by hubris, and by position. Whereas a quiet individual who had that storming idea in the corner never raised their hand, or they did, and it got quickly stamped down. Or they were seen as a maverick and told to be quiet because they're always challenging. They're a cynic rather than a skeptic, and there's a very different understanding between those two words. So I think having that capability, whether it's eliminating groupthink or herding a bazillion ideas together, is a great capability that any organization should embrace.
Sarah, can I just kind of pick that concept up in the medical world? Do you find that, again, there is a sort of groupthink mentality kicks in around certain issues, or that actually people are much more willing to share and engage and to go for the best idea?
Yeah, no, I think there is there is definitely a medical version of groupthink. And I think historically we've been very poor as medical professionals at listening to people from outside the medical tent. So the neuroscientists, the psychologists. And I think what I'm starting to see is that these are the disciplines and areas of expertise have lots to bring to the medical conversation. So I would wholeheartedly agree. Yeah, really, really interesting to hear your talk, Marcus. And I love that that Daniel Kahneman quote of, make sure you protect your dissenters, because often those people do come with maybe what does seem like a left field idea, but actually it's got legs, and when you consider it, and there's really something in it. So I think on the whole, medics tend to want to conform with the group. It's probably a gross overgeneralization, but probably probably a truism. So some of these things be very applicable. Yeah.
Sorry, Jeremy, just coming back. I mean, the whole notion there of, I think as managing partners, we as a group probably are, when we get together as a group, it's fun because people do generally bring different perspectives. But how do you manage those different contributions from within your own firm and make sure that if not mavericks, but the sort of the people who possibly have an opinion but aren't always feel confident to express it? How do you help them feel that, bring them that confidence?
Yeah, I think it's interesting just listening to this, and my reference to herding cats, which is perhaps true amongst professional practices at the wider partnership group, but probably within our management teams, there is still an element of management teams being quite similar individuals within professional practices. I suspect that is true to most professional practices. I think the key is to try and get some good different thinking in your management teams and your heads of departments and heads of sectors, etc., so that they are part of a senior team that are bringing together those different ideas. So my comment on the one hand that we're herding cats, I think that's right, but I think it's really important to make sure there's a good mix and a strong, healthy mix, at the management level as well. And I suspect that a number of professional firms haven't had that in the past. I think we're all getting better at that now and all more conscious of that. But I suspect in the past we've not been terribly good at that.
And Francesca, when we bring in people from different cultures, I remember so many years ago saying that if you were doing a poll in Japan and you scored more than 3, that was equivalent to a nuclear amazing, whereas in America, if you get less than 5, you failed. I mean, how do you kind of cope with that situation, given you have so many different cultures in your ambit?
Yeah, I think that cultural awareness is huge. As you say, people have very different views of what's good and what's bad in their own culture. I was chatting to my Chinese colleagues actually just yesterday, and we were talking about it's fascinating when you have a group of people that's predominantly Western, either European or North American, and everybody fights for space in a conversation. People talk over each other. There's sort of a respect, but it's very much loudest voice gets heard the most. And people feel it's fine to talk a lot. In China, they're much humbler and they really appreciate being asked to contribute, and they wouldn't feel that they should put themselves forward. It's a very different hierarchy. And just one example of the multiple different cultural, emotional intelligence elements around the world, but you could often incorrectly assume that someone sitting in that part of the world had less to say, or perhaps was more unwilling to share. But it's completely driven by that cultural awareness piece, and it takes you right back to are you really listening to what people are saying? And actually, are you really listening to what people aren't saying? So if you do have a very diverse cultural group, are you managing that meeting in a way that makes sure everybody has a voice and they get asked to contribute in a way that's appropriate to their culture? Because otherwise you just hear the people are very comfortable speaking, often in their own language, not speaking in their second language. So hugely important to enable to get to that red team thinking, that you recognise the way people need to contribute so they can add that value.
Let's go back to Sarah and sleep for a second, because I think, again, that was a really interesting area. I mean, I was going to kind of ask the question, where do you start? But I mean, Francesca mentioned that there are some sort of quite interesting ways to help people sleep. But I mean, somebody who has got into a habit, and we all have habits, of, let's say, sleeping, let's say 5 hours a night or something like that, which isn't on the what I call bad place, but certainly would impair you. I think that's pretty obvious. How do you actually sort of break that habit in your experience? Where do you start?
I think with your comment, Richard, it depends if you want to be operating at that cognitive equivalent of being at the drink driving limit, doesn't it, really? Whether that's sort of acceptable to you in your working environment. But where do you start? So what the way that we start with organisations is to just create an awareness of the many ways that sleep is impacting how people feel about work. We've got a diagnostic that actually shows the number of people who are at the threshold for poor mental health in any organisation, and starts to show the impact that sleep is having. But time and again, we see that sleep isn't just impacting people at an individual level, how they feel, it's impacting the performance of the organisation. And that's the reason to go in. But at an individual level, I'd say there's probably 3 really simple things that everybody can do. The first is to actually understand that sleep is your best productivity tool, and actually start to value it. It's interesting, the comments that Francesca made. I think we have grown up with this sort of sense that to prioritise sleep is almost a bit slothful. We know that babies and children need it because they're growing, they're still developing. But actually, as adults, there's so many more things that we could be doing. And but effectively, they all chip away at our sleep. And so I think just giving sleep the attention and the priority and the space that it deserves. The other thing is just to be super boring with your going to bed and getting up times. So the more consistent you can make your bedtime and wake time, the better your sleep efficiency. So in other words, you will sleep deeper, better, you will get the right sort of architecture of the night's sleep. So just keeping everything as I mean, we live in the real world where none of us are really socializing at the moment. So there's always going to be the odd night where that falls by the wayside. But the best thing is to be consistent, put an alarm on your phone. And the last thing is the whole issue of blue light. So we've got some photoreceptor cells at the back of our eyes that send light messages to the sleep area in the brain, the area that produces melatonin, which is our sleepy hormone. And the problem is within the visible light spectrum, we've got all the wavelengths of light from the shortwave blue to red, but these photoreceptors, they are only sensitive to blue light. And blue light suppresses that melatonin release that we need to get in the evenings for a good night's sleep. And so many of us need to be on our LED screens, laptops, iPads, whatever, phones in the evening. So if you have to do that, looking at ways to block the blue light that's emitted. So downloading some free software, putting night shift on your phone, getting some amber glasses. I've got a pair. I look like Ali G when I'm wearing them. But those three things, avoiding blue light, prioritizing sleep, and trying to keep a pretty predictable sleep-wake routine will help you to get better sleep. Yeah.
Jeremy, do you have you found that sort of something that is going to resonate with you and your family, or is it just the routine is just too strong?
No, I have a very strong routine in terms of sleep pattern. So yes, it certainly resonates with me. I don't always sleep well, I would say, but certainly in terms of the time that I go to sleep and the time that I wake up are very consistent. Sadly, very consistent in the current environment, but yeah.
Maybe this is our accountancy training where we're taught to be systemic, as they say. Francesca, any final thoughts before we say goodbye to our guests for this week?
Oh, I think we're all going to take some of the way from that, aren't we? I'm going to make sure I'm off to bed at a decent time tonight for sure. And the red team thinking really stood out for me as well as tools and technology to help us. So another sort of range of really interesting things. But I think we're getting a really strong theme coming through week after week around you are not going to be a great leader unless you look after yourself. So valuing and making sure intentionally that you look after your personal health, whatever aspect you need to look after, will make you better able to help everybody else around you.
Wow. Well, thank you very much for that. I think we're just into that final minute, sadly, but I'd like to thank our incredibly interesting and high quality presenters today. So I'd like to thank Sarah for waking us up to the need to sleep. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. And I'd also like to thank Marcus for again reminding us that you have to be able to make sure that all points of view are heard and actually then brought together in a systemic way or a systematic way. I think it's probably the same thing, because otherwise, again, you will end up with the alpha males taking over, and that isn't necessarily a good place to be. There are times if the nuclear power station is about to explode, you might need the alpha male, but as Sarah's pointed out, it's probably through lack of sleep that you're in that situation in the first place. So that's quite a nice little segue, I think. Anyway, there will be, as always, I mentioned earlier on that each of these 5-minute presentations will be up next week in the YouTube, and also in the main management library we'll have the full series. So that's exciting. Hope you found today valuable. Next week, we're going to be looking at skills development with Nick Davis. We're going to be looking at informal networks with Neil Farmer, and Suzanne Pugley is coming to talk a bit about what marketing can do with its new agenda now that it's jumped so much up on the agenda. So I hope you find today valuable, and obviously please encourage your peers to come along. Only just to say, back next Friday, and thank you again to my guests and to my regulars, Jeremy and Francesca, and look forward to having another wonderful day in the sunshine, and bye for now.